be thoughtful every step of the way and recognize that foundations take time to settle and cement into something strong.
On this week's episode, we welcome Anthony Lacavera, a serial entrepreneur with a remarkable track record of success. Anthony's journey includes founding Globalive and Wind Mobile, both of which made significant waves in the telecom industry. And with a history of 5 successful exits and 3 notable failures, Anthony's insights are both profound and practical. Anthony shares his experiences from the challenges of disrupting Canada's telecom giants to his new role with the Paradise Mobile crew in the Caribbean. We dive into his latest venture, Pairus, a cutting-edge, AI-powered platform focused on holistic wellness and building meaningful relationships. We also explore Anthony's take on longevity and the concept of life engineering, as well as his thoughts on the evolving venture capital landscape and the role AI is having on shaping the future entrepreneurs. On this episode, we dig into resilience, innovation, and the future of wellness with one of the most dynamic figures in the industry. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Anthony.
Great to be with you, Matt.
You know, I'm super excited to have you on the show, as I know a lot of our listeners are going to really enjoy the topics that we're digging into today. But before we jump in, it'd be great if you can give our listeners a brief background on your story, you know, where you grew up and went to school, and your early career history.
Yeah, well, I was born in Canada, in Southern Ontario, in a small town called Welland, Ontario, and grew up there and went to a Catholic high school called Notre Dame, which I'm still a big supporter of these days, and went to the University of Toronto for engineering school, and then started my first business right after graduating from engineering school. So it's been a long career as an entrepreneur for me, 25, coming up on 30 years as I turned 50. And the whole journey has been as a founder, co-founder, CEO.
It's amazing, Anthony. I mean, obviously a lot of Canadians know who you are, but for some of our global listeners, you know, you've had a total of 5 exits. You've had 3 business failures to date, you know, and you first founded Globalive in 1998 with a $25,000 small business loan. And then you also founded Annunciate Conferencing, which was acquired in 2006 for $30 million. And then in 2008, you went for the big one. And that's when you founded a wireless carrier, Wind Mobile, which you sold to Shaw Communications for $1.3 billion US in 2015. And you obviously tried to buy it back later for $3.75 billion. You know, I'd love to hear just sort of the founding story behind Wind Mobile and, you know, the idea you and your team had to overcome when taking on this very highly regulated and powerful Canadian telecom industry.
Yeah, look, I think was quite a journey, obviously, Matt. And it was certainly one of those like classic founding stories of a roller coaster with a lot of ups and downs and a lot of moments where we really thought, we're not sure this is going to make it. But at the core of it, the thesis was that wireless prices were too high in the Canadian market as they compared to global prices. So for people listening from around the world, everyone's quite used to having some good choices for wireless and having some pretty cost-effective plans for their cell phone service. But that just wasn't the case in Canada. In fact, prices in Canada were among the highest in the world. So we thought there was a good opportunity to bring a new wireless carrier to the market and bring Canadians good value for money in wireless. And we were successful at doing that, Matt. We brought prices down over 20% everywhere that Wind Mobile was operating. So I'm really proud of that achievement in terms of that story. And that was the core thesis, though. And that's how we raised the capital. That's how we put the team together, with the mission being around bringing a new choice, an independent choice, and lower prices in wireless services. So that did work out well, but obviously, as I say, not without its ups and downs.
Right, of course. And for our listeners internationally, Canada has the same landmass as, you know, the United States, but, you know, only 1/10 the population. So we've had
40 million people less, 38 million.
Yeah, and subsidize the rest of the country from where we obviously have more of the population living along the parallel, the US. But I guess, you know, I'd love to hear, what was the decision that you believe was the most pivotal in making Wind as successful as it was?
I think it was really about transparency. So, you know, when you look across all consumer brands, I think the lesson that I learned there was build something that has transparency and integrity with respect to pricing. So people know what they're getting, they know what they're buying, and they can count on it when they get their bill at the end of the month. They know what they're going to be paying. And I think that was a big gap in wireless, still is to this day, in cell phone service around the world, with roaming charges, with, you know, variable data charges. So whether you're talking about in Europe and Asia, in the United States, I mean, it still is a challenge. But I think the industry has trended towards a lot more transparency and integrity with respect to billing, and people with unlimited rate plans, unlimited data plans, people are getting a lot more, as all your listeners would be familiar with, right? People are getting more transparency. So I think that's the key thing. That was the key brand promise. And I think we fulfilled on that. And it was early in the evolution of that. We're talking now like, over 10 years ago, almost 15 years ago. So you got to think back of how cell phone service was at the beginning of Instagram, at the beginning of before TikTok, beginning of Instagram, beginning of Twitter. It was just the beginning of mobile video. YouTube was just taking off with mobile video. So in those days, you could really get, stung with a big roaming charge or a big data, as we all have been stung. So bringing kind of stability in pricing and consistency and delivering on that brand promise of transparency was key for us.
Yeah, I mean, transparency, let's face it, in any regulated industry like telecom is an oxymoron, I think. And this idea of how the fact that people have cheaper plans in the middle of Canada or northern Canada versus people who live in like cities like Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver is kind of crazy. It's a cost plus model, right? So I guess a lot of people have heard about the sale of Wind Mobile to Shaw in 2015 for $1.3 billion. But a lot of people don't know about the story about how you tried to buy it back for $3.75 billion in 2022. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
We never wanted to sell it. Our mission wasn't complete, but it's a long story to get into why we ended up having to sell it. But the short version is that our investors were from abroad, and there was big controversy of the investors that I brought into the country. Because as you say, in any regulated industry, the transparency is a challenge, but also the regulations themselves are a challenge. And one of the challenges we faced was limits around foreign capital and how much ownership needed to be domestic, being Canadian versus, from further abroad. So that became a significant challenge for us. And in the short version, that's we had to sell the business. We did really well on the exit, but our mission wasn't really complete. And I really still wanted to, move forward with it and didn't really want to sell it. So when the opportunity came up to buy it back, we ran hard at raising the capital buyback. We successfully raised close to $4 billion of bridge capital from big banks to buy the business back. We made an offer, and ultimately the Canadian government decided that we were the second best choice, not the best choice. Of course, I could spend the next 2 hours telling you why the Canadian government made a mistake, but we lost that one. But we took a great shot at it, and it was really about completing the mission. We built a great team, had a great brand. Had a great momentum in the marketplace, and it's not the same business today. Some 8 years later, but we felt like we could reinvigorate it, recommit to the brand promise, and redeliver on the brand promise.
Yeah, I mean, not to rev you up too much, Anthony, but I mean the fact that Rogers, which obviously has their hands in everything in the government, was able to get this thing, and then now seeing what's happened to the company is a pretty big non-shock to the system. But the other thing that kind of blows my mind about that foreign ownership restriction is that if the government only looked at how much intellectual property is actually acquired from private companies in Canada and then used abroad, but owned abroad and then sold right back to us, is quite mind-boggling. Agricultural industry, pharmaceutical industry, hardware industry, semiconductors, you name it, right?
Everything. I mean, even consumer packaged goods, right? Everything. It's just shocking to me that we don't know about that domestically in Canada. But look, I think we're an export economy, and we have this idea that everything is being exported, but that's not it at all. In fact, most things are imported. And you're right. So much of the intellectual property we built. I try to draw the analog with Germany, because I think Germany is a really interesting country where a tremendous amount of IP has been produced. Take automotive, for example. They've been really good and monetizing that domestically, right? And building a significant domestic industrial base, right? In automotive. You think of the big brands, BMW, Mercedes, whatever, but also smaller brands too. But you think of that. And then you think of all the cars we make in Canada that are for Ford, GM, Chrysler, or Honda, Mitsubishi, Toyota, like no Canadian brand. So I think it's really interesting to think about that dichotomy, and we got to fix that in this country.
I always think about that. When someone says German made, it's like, okay, shut up and take my money.
Right?
But if someone said to me Canadian made, I'd be like, that's never heard that before. It's quite interesting. But, you recently entered the telecom business again, right? This time in the Caribbean. What interested you to move back into the company Paradise Mobile, where you're now the chairman?
Well, I'm a bit of a tech nerd. Right? I'm a computer engineer by education. And so I really am nerding out on this one, because it's like a first time for a cloud native network to be built, meaning people think of cell phone networks. They think of like the big infrastructure, that old telecom infrastructure, those huge buildings you see in the big cities. In New York City, there's buildings that have no windows on them. And inside there is what used to be a huge telecom switch. So people think of it that way, but the world now is, as you know, is cloud native. It's, server driven, virtual infrastructure driven. And so this network in Bermuda, I'm really excited about. Really proud of the team that built it at Paradise Mobile. It's the first really cloud native end to end network. And what it means is people are getting incredible download and upload speeds, incredible speeds at much lower cost of service than the old world of big infrastructure. Think of it as like moving from mainframes, which the telecom industry is in many ways still stuck in, to what we all live in today with all the cloud services we enjoy and streaming services and everything.
It's like when you look at Africa, they skipped the copper wire lines because, they went right to mobile, right to the cloud because they didn't have the time to even build up the infrastructure that we had, I guess, the good fortune of during those days, but really the misfortunes of having to deal with all that old legacy infrastructure now that we got to clean up.
Got to carry it along, right? Got to maintain it. And so there's big costs to that. Yeah, so I love that. This thing sort of leapfrogs everything and gives you cloud native anyway, it's exciting. I'm excited about it. So I think I'm excited to do it, but I think there's an opportunity to bring that model now to other markets around the world. Obviously, Bermuda is a small market, but the goal of that business is to bring really cost-effective 5G services everywhere in the world.
That's fantastic. We obviously have a lot of exciting things that you've been involved in, but you also had some business failures. I'd love to ask you, what was your biggest loss personally or professionally, financially, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, my biggest loss personally, financially, was the business that I started, and it mattered a lot to me, the money at the time, because I was a much earlier in my career. Early 2000s, I had this idea, Matt, that I could offer telecom services for free based on advertising. I'm telling you, man, this was the dumbest idea I've ever had. And I was sort of at a point in my career where I thought, I can figure this out. I'm just going to keep pivoting and pivoting and pivoting, and I'm going to try something different. And you convince yourself, you drink your own Kool-Aid, as the saying goes, and you believe you're going to be able to figure something out. I could not figure this out. And then the truth is that I think it was just, at the end of the day, a bad idea. But I beat my head against the wall for 3 years and lost several millions of dollars, which was a huge sum for me at the time, because I just couldn't accept that I couldn't make it work. And I just kept going at it. So yeah, it was called Free Phone. And it was anything but free for me, man.
Someone's paying the bill.
The opposite of free for me personally and financially.
That's crazy. It sounds like a lot of founders who struggle with this, which is where they start with the solution or what they want the solution to look like, but they don't really understand the core problem that they're solving. Was that something that you learned from that?
I think indeed, right? I think you become enamored with an idea. And I've had a lot of interaction with founders. I'm blessed at this point in my life to interact with so many founders, that have so many brilliant ideas, and I'm always learning something from them every day. And it's always something, but obviously they're very passionate about their idea, which you need to be in order to have any chance of success. You have to have conviction around what you're doing, the big problem you're solving, and why it's important that you're solving it, and why your solution is going to make that problem, better for the world, make that challenge better for the world. But the other side of that is, of course, is you can, become myopic and start to put the blinders on and stop and not realize when you're just really not in a situation that's ever going to lead to success. So I think, this is a really common issue, but it's such an interesting, economy there, because you really need to have that conviction and absolute passion and belief to your core that what you're doing is important and you're going to be successful. But you have to keep your eyes open. And that's been the lesson for me, is go into something eyes wide open. And the new stuff I'm in now, I'm always thinking self-critically all the time. Does this really make sense? And I even now sort of do these acid tests, which I talk to founders about a lot. Just ask other people that have no idea about the topic and subject matter, and no idea. And ideally somebody that the problem you think may not even be a problem that affects their life in any way, and just get their opinion. Let's do some sanity checks. It's like doing your own little focus groups. What's amazing about ChatGPT and Gemini and even Vertex, these new generative AI platforms, is you can make your own little focus groups on them and simulate, the answers to them. And so I'm experimenting with that these days.
That's really cool. It's right. You want to be contrarian as a founder, as you know, but not with blinders on, where you're only answering your own questions back to yourself. And I think a lot of times founders obviously think well, I know what the next app should look like and feel like. I'm not really going to listen to what everyone else has to say because I know. And I think that's the biggest problem. But, let's switch gears about the startup side that you obviously have your hands in a lot these days with your partner, Bryce. You've been investing and supporting startups through Globalive for over 10 years now. I guess, a lot of people would love to know, if they sat down with you and Bryce, what traits do you guys look for in startups when considering investments through Globalive? And, how do the founders get access to you and Bryce and the rest of the team beyond just the capital you provide?
Yeah, I think what Bryce has done some amazing work around this idea of founder resilience and really making this very founder centric. And we as investors are very founder centric. It gets played off as founder friendly, but I don't think that's the right way to think about it. I think it's founder centric, meaning all of these things. And Matt, you know this, better than anyone, right? Like you really need to have the right person, the right characteristics, the right personality traits, the right capabilities, of course, and skill sets, but it's really about the individual and the personal resilience of that individual, like knowing for sure that things are going to go, the only thing we can be certain of, it's not going to go according to the plan that we've all envisioned, right? That's the only thing we're actually sure of at day one of a startup is the only thing we're sure of is this is not going to go according to what we wrote down as a business plan. So it's going to be some shades of gray and variations, and these little incremental steps along the way and little decisions along the way are cumulative, and they do add up to you being ultimately way off course or ultimately on course. I like to think of it as, you can start anywhere on the globe, and if you make 1% wrong course decisions 1,000 times, you'll end up literally on the other side of the globe from where you intended to end up. So,
right.
And so I think it's like these small things, but it's also big things. And when things are really not going well, it's about founder resilience. So Bryce and I really live by that kind of, ethos. And he's built with Mindframe Connect, which is a sort of content and educational platform suite of tools around founder resilience, really, but also programming around it and curriculum around it, I think is a really great set of resources that are widely available now for founders. And I think it's about that. That's how we think about it as investors. So point one, resilience, and as someone committed to that. But then two is about what does this person think about learning every day, right? And it's sort of again this interesting art of discerning with someone who is sitting down with incredible passion and conviction to their core that they're solving a really important problem and that their solution is going to be effective. But at the other side of it, eyes wide open and learning every single day about what they don't know and where their blind spots are and what could go wrong and working through those contingencies, not becoming obsessed with them, but awareness and thought around them. So I think it's that would be my second thing. I mean, it all sort of falls under this category of awareness and eyes wide open is the expression I use, but awareness, and self-awareness, right? Which early in my career, if you caught me 20 years ago and I was talking to you about free phone, I would have said, man, this thing is a home run, grand slam, no chance I can fail. I would have been just over the top with the blinders on, as you said. So now we're obviously way more, eyes wide open and blinders off and methodically keeping them on. Yeah. So those two things.
Oh, I love that. Self-awareness as a founder is so vital. I love asking founders questions like, what has to go exceptionally right for this to be successful? And tell me all the things that will kill you tomorrow. And if they can't answer those, they're not self-aware. It's a saying, you've got two ears and one mouth. Those who know a lot say little. Those who know little say a lot. And so if you keep talking and talking without listening, you're not really going to get a lot of, work done. And I think for you and Bryce, you're operators, right? So I got to ask you, when you sit down with that founder and you're hearing them tell you about their unlimited potential, all the success they have in the pipeline, but you obviously want to get to the nitty gritty of what they're struggling with, how do you manage the balance between wanting to roll up your sleeves and get your hands in the business as a successful operator yourself versus kind of sitting back and letting them run their own course?
That's an excellent thought and question. And I think there's no one answer to that, right? This is really it's very circumstantial and contextual. So what is really going on at that moment for that founder and in that business? What stage are they at? What are the circumstances? One of the things that we talk a lot about is to be an effective mentor or effective investor for the founder, you need to learn how to listen, because we coming in as investors or mentors, we know fraction of 1% of the information, Matt, to make an intelligent assessment of the situation. So the first thing for an investor to do is listen. As you say, it's part of the art of conversation to listen and ask intelligent questions, but there's normally a significant imbalance there where right away people jump to just speaking instead of listening. And I think that's the first thing that we try to do is listen, and we try to go overweight on listening up front, and then we try to be really specific and narrow about what advice we're giving, with the caveats that we still don't have all the information. The reason we're effective, I think, at partnering with founders is that I think that we're approachable as normal people. We don't pass judgment on someone is having a difficult time, because I think one of the advantages of having been operators is we've seen a whole bunch of difficult times ourselves firsthand.
Yeah. You also exemplify a lot of that with the stories that you guys share. You have your own podcast called Trailblaze, which you get produced with the Creator Club. You've got stories of innovators and game changers, and you've got these stories of resilience, around the stories of how to overcome failure. What are some of the most amazing things that you've learned from some of your own guests on the podcast Trailblaze? And how have you seen the idea of resilience exemplified in some of the founders that you work with?
It transcends them all, right? So every single one of them have stories of adversity. And I think the first thing that I like to talk about is those stories of adversity and how they overcame them, because it is a universal reality for founders. But I have to say, zooming out for a second, Matt, it's the truth. It's true for everyone in the world. And so I think part of this is just recognizing that we all have adversity in our life. We all have significant personal and professional challenges along the way. Founders do, of course, and founders have a certain kind of those and a certain version of those. But for everybody, they're just as important and just as extreme in many circumstances. So I think it's really about that, is that I love learning about how people overcame the adversity they're facing. And then hopefully when someone listens to an episode of Trailblaze, they can see a couple of things in their own life that are similar, and then they can hopefully gain a solution, right? Coming away from it with okay, here's the strategy that this really successful founder did, or this really successful person, zooming out, it's a person. What did they do to solve that problem? And how could I apply that in my own life? So some of the examples would be, of course, you think of I think of Sabrina Fiorellino, who's an amazing entrepreneur, but in construction, and as a female CEO founder in the construction industry, is male dominated. Consistently, she was underestimated. Consistently, she was marginalized or ostracized. She was never one of the boys. So it was amazing to hear how she, as a very successful female founder in a male dominated industry, navigated her path and established credibility. Tools for everyone, by the way, not even gender specific. It's tools for anyone that she talks about on how to overcome adversity when people are making judgments against you, right? And we all come into situations where we're being judged. She saw that she was being judged, and she came up with strategies to overcome it. And I think there's lessons for women in that podcast, but there's lessons for everyone about how you can overcome a situation where people are judging you. In her case, being underestimated regularly, when she's one of the most brilliant, entrepreneurs, founders I've ever met. But again, just people look through a lens. People have bias, conscious or unconscious. In many ways, she could have just struggled with that and gave up on many occasions. But she powered through it with strategies of having full awareness and then thinking about tactically with each person how she could overcome it. And she's now crushing it. So I think there's strategies for every founder.
I love it when founders kind of come forward and share those experiences of failure or setbacks. Oftentimes when we meet with companies and the founders early on, we actually tell them to not tell us about their successful history of experiences, but some of the negative ones. So we say, how did your last company that failed miserably end up? What happened with you and your co-founder? How did you dissolve the relationship? What led you to get to that place, and what lessons did you learn from it? Or another thing that catches founders off guard all the time is I ask them to pull up their LinkedIn messages for outbound for people that they're trying to convince to have a demo or a call with them. And how do they respond graciously or not graciously to some of the people that say, no, screw off, I don't have time for you. And I want to see how they actually communicate with potential prospects in a way that they are not comfortable sharing with a potential partner like us to show their true selves, because I think that really helps founders become a much more, as you say, resilient and empathetic founder, which is really important, right?
I love that one. I might use that one if you don't mind.
You're welcome to. But it sounds like you obviously care a lot about relationships, personal and professional, Anthony, and also extending your network to other people's. You've taken this to a new level with a new venture that you've co-founded called Pairus. Pairus. What is the story behind this, and what is your mission?
I really think there's an opportunity to completely transform the matchmaking and dating industry. I think we're at a moment where so many people are feeling increasingly lonely and isolated on dating apps. And there's so much negative energy, so many negative outcomes going on that entire industry is ripe for disruption. So what Pairus is about is really starting with the self and starting with yourself. My co-founder, Emily Lyons, who's an amazing entrepreneur in her own right, has started a number of very successful businesses. But she has already a matchmaking business. And what she does with matchmaking is really gets to know someone and figures out who's going to be a great match for that person. And she cuts through all of the noise that people feel and helps people transform themselves first into becoming the best version of themselves. And that, of course, once they become the best version of themselves, they also attract exactly the right match for themselves. So what we're doing with Pairus is bringing all of that, call it old world, offline, intuitive business, and those processes and bringing those into a digital marketplace. And so Pairus is really about leveraging AI, as it suggests, leveraging artificial intelligence to really get to know people and then curate some amazing introductions for them. And my own hope for that is that for people that are using Pairus, is that they would put their head up in a year or two, and whether they've met their one life partner or not, they will have felt a very positive experience of having met some amazing people that they want to know anyway. So that's for me the really ultimate test of Pairus' success is people feel better about themselves and they'll have made some great new connections and great new friends, regardless of whether there ends up being a one life partner, spousal connection, or whatever that goes in terms of a personal journey. So that's what Pairus is about. And it's really taking advantage of a moment where there's just so much negative energy around dating online, dating apps, online dating, everything around that has just become really tragic, actually. And it's causing people to become so lonely and isolated and so down on themselves. So I love the idea of helping people in that with Pairus.
It sounds like an anti-hookup app, anti-Hinge, anti-Tinder, and maybe anti-Bumble, by taking the idea of actual meaningful relationships to the next level, where we've obviously lost a lot of that, that lost generation of kids who didn't experience the last years of high school, their first few years of university during COVID. They are really struggling when it comes to having their own real meaningful relationships. How do you think about that? And why do you think having real relationships is so vital for entrepreneurship, longevity, and just life in general?
Well, that was really where it started for me, is that I am extremely keen on longevity and all things longevity from a technology standpoint, in terms of therapeutics and solutions and interventions and protocols towards living a healthier, longer life. But there's some physical things that we all think about right away. We always default to, I got to eat better, I got to sleep more, I got to exercise more. And then we go from there, we get more granular, and I'm going to take this supplement or take this IV drip, right? That's where people go. But what people are missing is that human connections and the quality of the human connections you have in your life. And I mean all human connections. I mean, obviously your spouse, your friends, your kids, your immediate circle, but all human connections. So it's the Uber driver that you interacted with yesterday. It's someone you met at Starbucks, was in line with you in front of Starbucks and you had a chat. It's all forms of human connections, and how you, from the most intimate and most significant and most important ones in your life, in the moment interactions. It's clear, overwhelmingly clear, volumes and volumes of research, that this is core to living a healthier, longer life. And Dan Buettner's Blue Zones that have blown up in popularity recently, and he talks about obviously the Centurion diet and how people are living, long and all this. But one of the things that he talks about a lot as well is that those people are living very happy, healthy lives in the community they have in those blue zones. They always spend time with friends, with family. They're always walking the streets, interacting with each other. It's consistent across all those blue zones as they're defined. Right? How are people living to 100 and healthy? And that's how. So it started for me, Pairus started for me as a longevity initiative, right? Getting people to understand that it's so important to them to have in-person, real-life human connections of all kinds. And this is sort of like something that, to your point, was lost. COVID did a lot of damage to people in their late teens and early 20s. They were informative years of people's lives, did a lot of damage to people's live human interactions. And so I think that it's about setting that back on track. And for me, it's clear that human connections are the most important thing. So I'm really into investing in tech, into longevity. I've been doing this stuff on myself for a long time. At 50 years old now, I feel great.
Tell me, I want to know. I just turned 40. You look way younger than me, but obviously you live by this life hack ethos. What do you do from a personal standpoint for everything?
Every time I interact with someone, including us right now, I'm going to take away and think about what I learned out of the conversation with you right now. And I journal that kind of stuff. And I think about the connection that I made with you today. And I reflect on the positive so that I got from that. It's really about your mindset. It's really about investing cycles and thinking about all of the good interactions you have in a day and recognizing that you can learn something from everyone. Just like those things sound like euphemisms and they sound like, oh, well, what a bunch of like malarkey, like honest to God, like, chill, man. But just a simple change of that where I think a lot of people would end this conversation like we're having today and then stop thinking about it. Like, okay, I'm on to the next meeting, right? I'm going to, actually write down what I learned from you today. And so I think it's like, and think about that and think positively about our interaction. And I feel like that stuff weaves its way into your subconscious and it resets everything of how you look at the world and how you engage with the world. And I know, you can start sounding spiritual, you can sounding a bit woo-woo, you can go in those directions with that stuff like that. But for me, that's my answer. The one thing that I've done methodically throughout my whole life is learn from every single conversation that I have. And that's like, for me, the biggest life lesson. Learn from every conversation you have.
That's amazing. I was going to ask you, you speak to so many students as well. Is the one critical lesson for the next generation of entrepreneurs to just listen more?
Listen and learn. Everyone you interact with has something to teach you. And, it may not be immediately obvious what you could gain from or what you could learn, what you can gain, how you could add to your ethos, add to your zeitgeist. But do it, think about it and learn from people. It's incredibly uplifting, incredibly uplifting.
Yeah. Totally. And I also think like people obviously look at everything as a transaction, unfortunately, whether they're dealing with someone in a day-to-day life like the Uber driver or somebody, at the supermarket. But really, it's not about that. If you look at everything as a transaction, you'll never move one step in front of the other. You're always going to move one step back forward, one step backwards, because either you're winning in the transaction or the other person is. So zero sum at the end of the day, right? And that's just not a really good way of thinking.
I totally agree. You're right on.
You're obviously a technologist, Anthony, and you love playing with all the new technologies out there. And I'm hearing you say that you spend a lot of time with the new AI tools available out there. How are you using them, and how are you seeing the role of AI impacting the next generation of entrepreneurs, as well as impacting maybe current legacy business leaders who may be pushed out by some of the tools that are coming up behind them?
Look, I think there's a whole lot to discuss there. I think that's worthy of our next whole conversation. It's a big conversation, but I think transition, like think about just the economic impact of like transition in the workforce. Those are big problems that need to be focused on. But for myself, I'm really just sort of, like I was saying earlier, it's like I'm actually just at this point in very much a learning phase. And so I don't want to go so far as to say that every conversation I have with ChatGPT, I'm learning something from, consistent with my entire ethos. Is okay, but since I'm speaking to Gemini, I better learn something. I think there's an opportunity for every business to be transformed. And one of the things I'm really excited about right now, for example, is we're building this longevity content platform where we're taking in all of the subject matter expert content and using generative AI to synthesize it into actionable intelligence for everyone. So instead of having to consume a 2-hour or 3-hour podcast from an expert on some topic in longevity, and there's tons of big podcasts out there, Peter Attia, Andrew Huberman, the big podcasts, or watching just a 30-second short on YouTube or TikTok, short video saying like, take this supplement right now and it's going to make you live forever, right? The snake oil type stuff, sure, this stuff is legitimate, but essentially like synthesizing all that down into actionable intelligence for people and scoring it all, right, based on subject matter experts, publications, to say to someone, yeah, like, you know what, that's a good idea for you to think about, maybe that not so much. And so I'm excited about that. And that's an example of like, that would not have been possible to have been built, even a year ago, Matt. Like you would not have been able to say, get this AI soldier out there ingesting all of the content of all of these subject matter experts in longevity and then, hey, produce me a report, synthesize it into a summary. And so we're playing around with that. We have some developers working on that. I'm really excited about it. But software development is totally different, like literally today than it was 2 years ago or a year ago even.
Yeah, we talk about engineers not being the same today as they are going to be probably 3 years from now in the way they work. And that's going to have a huge change. It's interesting, Anthony, you're obviously someone people look up to a lot in the industry and always getting asked for advice on things. And sometimes that happens to us as well. And our calendars are just jam-packed with so much kind of conversations around either giving advice or receiving advice. So what we've done, and I'm sure you can do the same thing, is we've taken all the podcasts that we've done, all the transcriptions of calls we've had with founders and portfolio companies, and we've combined them all into a knowledge base using our portfolio company VoiceFlow's backend software and created a live agent, which is like an advice agent that our founders can just ask questions about that we would probably have the same answers for if we were given them on a Zoom call, but they're available using all the back-end data we have from historical conversations. I think that's going to impact a lot of the next generation of entrepreneurs.
Look, I think that's absolutely amazing, and I think taking a thought leadership position like you have and actioning it the way you have and being an early mover in it, I think is only going to strengthen your own, pedigree and your own position in the marketplace. And so there's obviously like an incredible benefit both ways, as you say, right? You're going to be able to build your brand and build your franchise much more quickly, being able to reach so many more people with the advice you would have given maybe one-on-one, right? Maybe it was a one-on-one conversation, and now you get to give that same input to 1,000 people, and the same way your agent's learning from 1,000 people.
Do you think, Anthony, a lot of founders today are impatient or suffer from this bias that good things come quickly, where in fact things take a long time for them to actually mature and bake? You and Bryce are someone that I think probably comes from this sort of, if you build it, they will come mentality, but you cannot build it too quickly or else it will break down. What advice are you giving to the younger founders about how you got to take care of your company in the long term, your health, your longevity, and not try to rush everything because it doesn't happen overnight?
This is a huge challenge, Matt. I don't know. I don't know if it's just the way social media has evolved, the way our society's evolved, but something has caused young people to really feel like they really need to get in this instant gratification. I don't know if it's the dopamine, the classic dopamine hit from TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever it is. But I feel like this is a huge problem and a growing problem. And so I think what I actually say to people is like, look, I'm not trying to suggest for a second that my way was the right way to build the business. I think there's infinite right ways. Your way, is going to be just as good as mine. But be thoughtful every step of the way and recognize that foundations take time to settle and cement into something strong. And so if you are quickly putting the next brick on a foundation, you would never want to live in a house where somebody stacked the roof on, before the foundation had settled and was solid. Obviously, when you look at the trajectory of wealth creation of something, like if you look at like the trajectory of the big entrepreneurs we all hear about, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, you see those time to incredible transformation of the world and incredible wealth creation. It also is kind of like a bit of like a difficult thing to then say, okay, well, I'm going to take 20 years and I'm going to build this nice little business. So I think that's part of the challenge is in tech, for sure. But I think it's also people are too much now looking for that instant gratification, and they'll sacrifice everything, including their health, to your point, to achieve it. And then you ultimately do not achieve it. So to take a step back, what I always say to founders is life is short and long. And the long part of it necessitates you having health and having wellness. And so again, back to my theme of longevity, I'm always talking about that now. I'm always talking about it in this way: production capacity and production. When you invest in yourself, in your own health, mental, emotional, and physical wellness, when you invest in that every day methodically, whatever that means for you, it means something different for everyone. It can mean yoga, it can mean going to the gym, it can mean taking a walk with a friend, whatever it means for you. Your physical, emotional, mental. You invest in mental wellness. You invest in that every day. And if you do, your production capacity is going to go up. And that will mean when you go to produce things, you're going to produce that much more effectively. So you can't ever imagine a factory where they never invest in the tooling on the manufacturing line, where they never invest in imagine a factory, that was making the Model T Ford, in 1910. If Ford was still trying to build cars like that, how successful would they be?
Right.
and now it's completely automated. So think of it that way. You have to invest in your own ability to produce every day. And think of it that way. You're a founder, you want to be successful. Think about investing in yourself every single day. And you're going to have so much better relationship with your friends, with your family, with your kids, with everyone around you, because you're going to have energy. You're going to finish the day and still have energy to go, play football with your buddies or take your kid to baseball practice, whatever, right? You're still going to have all that energy because you've invested in your production capacity consistently. It's such a hard conversation to have with people on that, because exactly to your point, people are looking for that such crazy rapid growth in like what they coin as success. And life is just so much more than that.
Absolutely. We have a lot of first-time founders who obviously we back at Ripple, and a lot of them, after we invest, wire the money. They're like, hey, when can we get the press release out? Or when can we get the TechCrunch article out? We said, not until you get your first 10 customers, because announcing that you got money from us is not the goal. What the goal is actually to build the infrastructure so that when we do announce something, it's combined with a big win with a customer, and therefore new customers see that, come in for an inbound demo, and you're ready to process them. Just like you said in the production side, if you had free ice cream for the first 100 customers and all of a sudden you sell out of the first 100 within the first 10 minutes, but you have 300 people waiting in line, you're done. How do you capitalize on it? And I think that's such great advice. So thank you for sharing that. Anthony, obviously, before we wrap things up, we always ask our guests for their fast favorites. So I got to ask you, first off, what's your favorite tech gadget?
First of all, I'm an Android guy, not an Apple guy. So I have nothing Apple in my life. I'm anti-Steve Jobs, even though he's long past.
That's okay.
I don't like the indentured servitude of the Apple ecosystem. I want to be free. The Samsung Z Fold 6 is the coolest tech gadget I've ever seen, being a tech nerd. First of all, now it folds perfectly. So it's actually a device that you can use as a regular phone in addition to opening it to get the inside screen. So I absolutely love that it works as a regular phone now, whereas the earlier iterations didn't. And I absolutely I'm one of these for people that loves consuming digital content in that bigger format. And all the apps get reformatted to fit on that screen. And so now you have two columns of text. You feel like, you're consuming content in a totally different way. I love that phone. And so I'm there's my advertisement for Samsung. Unpaid advertisement for Samsung.
Unpaid. But wait, do you think Google will spin out Android and become its own $30 billion a year revenue juggernaut?
I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. That's a great thing.
I think so. It'd be really cool if they do, because then it would be free, and YouTube as well. But you're an Android power user, so I figured you thought about it more than I have.
My sister worked at Google forever, and she was the executive back in the day when they acquired YouTube. She was their IP lawyer back in the day when they acquired YouTube.
Wow.
And so, yeah, she has a whole history of IP at Google. My sister, Catherine Lacavera, she spent her whole career as an IP attorney at Google, VP legal at Google.
Oh my God. So this case really kind of shown a lot of the work over the 20 years.
She knows it.
We'll have her on next time. Next is your favorite book.
The Science and Technology of Growing Young by Sergey Young. I'm going to get this right. That's my favorite one right now. He released it maybe a year and a half ago. I just reread it. It's a great one. The Science and Technology of Growing Young by Sergey Young. A full disclosure on that one. Actually, I invested in his fund also. He's a longevity VC.
Okay. What's the fund called? Longevity VC?
That's a great question. Actually, longevity something, but Sergey Young, his name is.
Awesome. And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
Oh, Matt, we spent like a half hour talking about it. Every single interaction you have with someone, think about what you can learn from that person. It may not be immediately obvious, but figure out what you learned and journal it.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to read your journal after you put it down tonight. So thanks for joining us in the tank today with Anthony Lacavera.
Thanks, Matt.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tank Talks. We hope you found today's conversation as insightful as we did. If you're enjoying the show, we've got 3 quick things to ask of you. First, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or YouTube. Next, follow us and stay up to date on upcoming episodes and behind-the-scenes content on social media with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And lastly, share the love. If you found value in today's episode, share with a friend or colleague who'd benefit too. Your support helps us bring in more amazing guests and keeps the Tank Talks engine running. That's it for today. Until next time, keep disrupting and innovating.